Assalamu alaikum guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Myself Murtaza Beg, first year MBBS student from Government Medical College Srinagar. Today in this video we will be discussing about the cardiac cycle and ECG. First of all, let us revise the circulatory pathway in our body. For example, this is our heart. This is the right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. For example, this is the capillary system at the lungs, and this is the capillary system at the tissue level. At the lungs, when oxygenation occurs, oxygenation of blood occurs, and this oxygenated blood is then transferred to the left atrium by special veins that carry oxygenated blood that are called the pulmonary veins. And जो oxygenated blood यहाँ आ गया, उसके बाद जो यहाँ पे valves होती हैं, this is called the bicuspid valve or mitral valve that transports the blood of left atrium into the left ventricle, and left ventricle then pumps the blood into the aorta, and aorta transports this blood into the systemic circulation. At the tissue level, this यहाँ पे capillary system जो है वहाँ पे exchange होता है of different substances. फिर यहाँ से major venous जो है that transports the blood back to the right atrium. This is the deoxygenated blood, and this from right atrium, when blood comes into the right atrium, this right atrium pumps this blood into the right ventricle through tricuspid valve, and from when right ventricle contracts, it pumps this deoxygenated blood into the pulmonary artery, which carries this deoxygenated blood into the lungs. This is the general circulation in our body. Now let us discuss the cardiac cycle. What is meant by the cardiac cycle? Cardiac cycle. These are the repetitive events that occur in our heart during one complete beat. All the events that occur in heart during one एक बीट के दौरान जो भी events हो रहे हैं हमारी बॉडी में, that are these repetitive events are called constitute the cardiac cycle. Now जो cardiac cycle होता है, we will divide this cardiac cycle into many phases. सबसे पहला phase जो होता है cardiac cycle. Cardiac cycle का सबसे पहला phase होता है when सबसे joint diastole. Here the diastole term means relaxation. जब भी आप diastole word सुनोगे, it means relaxation, और जब भी आप repolarization means repolarization भी relaxation का मतलब होता है. सबसे पहला जो heart की condition होती है, that's called the joint diastole. First phase of heart is called the joint diastole. The second phase होता है atrial systole. फिर atrial systole मतलब atria जो systole मतलब contraction, इसका मतलब है atria फिर contract करेगा, atrial systole, or we can say that it's also called atrial depolarization. Diastole, relaxation and repolarization or the similar terms, atrial systole or atrial depolarization. उसके बाद atrial systole के बाद जो तीसरा phase होता है, that is called the ventricular systole. Ventricular systole होता है, जो ही atrial systole मतलब atria contract करेगा, उसके बाद ventricles contract करेंगे, लेकिन इसी दौरान जो है atria वापस आता है अपनी normal position में, that's called atrial diastole. Ventricular systole. अब ventricles ने contract किया, जो last phase होगा that will be the ventricular diastole. That is, now ventricles will relax and they will be into their normal position. जो atrial, यहाँ पे एक important point है, कौन से दो phases जो हैं that are overlapped, ventricular systole और atrial diastole जो है that occur simultaneously. सबसे पहले हम बात करेंगे joint diastole की. Cardiac cycle का duration जो होता है that is 0.8 seconds. And later on we will see how it is 0.8 seconds. सबसे पहले, for example, this is our heart. सबसे पहले हम डिस्कस करेंगे joint diastole का मतलब क्या होता है. We know that this is the left atrium, this is right atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. We know that the oxygenated blood that comes from the lungs into the left atrium. Left atrium में आता है oxygenated blood. These are called the pulmonary veins. Pulmonary veins. Here, cardiac cycle में जो valves की function, valves की position होती है या valves का order होता है, that's much important. This is the bicuspid valve or mitral valve. This is the aorta. This is the tricuspid valve, and this is the pulmonary artery. We know that, since we know that this bicuspid and tricuspid valves are called the AV valves. This bicuspid valve and tricuspid valves are called collectively called AV valves. And this aortic, this is the pulmonary valve, and this is the aortic valve. These are collectively called the semilunar valves. These are called semilunar valves or SL valves. जो ही joint diastole, अब मैं यहाँ पे रब करूंगा, जो ही joint diastole होता है, जो ही joint diastole होता है, सबसे पहला फेज जो होता है that is the joint diastole. Joint diastole का मतलब है पूरा हार्ट जो है that is in a relaxed state. जो भी blood यहाँ से आता है from lungs, oxygenated blood, pulmonary veins, और यहाँ से जो tissues, तमाम tissues से जो deoxygenated blood आता है through the major veins or vena cava, through superior and inferior vena cava and inferior vena cava से जो deoxygenated blood आता है from the tissues into the right atrium. वो सारा चला जाता है, सारा नहीं, वो जो ही ये यहाँ पे हार्ट में आ जाता है, since heart is in the relaxed state, जो blood आता है that gets directly into the right ventricle. जो यहाँ से blood आएगा वो एट्रिया में नहीं रुकेगा, क्योंकि एट्रिया जो है that's in the relaxed state, वो यहाँ से डायरेक्ट चला जाएगा into the left ventricle. इसका मतलब जो है these bicuspid and the tricuspid valves are open during the joint diastole. इन joint, यहाँ पे आप याद रखेंगे दो points important है. जो during joint diastole, AV valves, bicuspid and tricuspid valves are open, and SL valves, semilunar valves, जो यहाँ पे ये valves हैं that are closed. Semilunar valves are closed. इसका मतलब जो majority of the blood coming from the pulmonary veins and the vena cava है, वो directly आएगा from these vessels directly into their respective ventricles. ये जो blood आता है that is the 70% of the total blood. 70% blood जो है that comes directly from these pulmonary veins and vena cava directly into their respective ventricles. 70%. Remember this thing. उसके बाद जो ही joint diastole end होता है, at the end of the joint diastole, these AV valves get closed. At the end of joint diastole, AV valves get closed. मतलब जो ही 70% ब्लड आता है डायरेक्टली, 70% के बाद जो बचा हुआ ब्लड होगा वो डायरेक्टली नहीं आएगा इनटू देयर रेस्पेक्टिव वेंट्रिकल्स, क्योंकि अब एवी वाल्व जो है वो क्लोज हो जाएंगे. जो ही एवी वाल्व्स क्लोज हो जाएंगे, जो भी ब्लड यहां आ गया दैट इज ओनली 70%. जॉइंट डायस्टोल में 70% फिलिंग होती है वेंट्रिकल्स की. उसके बाद जो सेकंड स्टेज है दैट इज द एट्रियल सिस्टोल. Now let us discuss the atrial systole. Right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. These are the major veins carrying the deoxygenated blood, and these are the pulmonary veins carrying the oxygenated blood. This is the bicuspid valve, and this is the tricuspid valve, collectively called AV valves. And this is the pulmonary artery carrying deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and this is the aorta carrying oxygenated blood to the systemic circulation. Now let us discuss the second phase of the cardiac cycle, that is the atrial systole. We know that इसका पहला जो फेज है उससे जो है 70% फिलिंग हो गई वेंट्रिकल्स की. यहाँ पे जो है 70% ब्लड आ गया. 70% आने के बाद जो एवी वाल्व्स थी वो क्लोज हो गई थी. That's why जो यहाँ पे अब 100% में 70% निकाल, 30% जो बचेगा यहाँ पे वो एट्रिया में ही रहेगा. क्योंकि ये वाल्व जो है क्लोज हो गई. अब जो एट्रियल सिस्टोल में क्या होता है, दिस ऐसे नोड स्टार्ट्स गिविंग द एक्शन पोटेंशियल्स. जो ही ऐसे नोड प्रोड्यूस करता है एक्शन पोटेंशियल, दिस एक्शन पोटेंशियल विल बी will be separate to all the cardiac musculature of both the atria, and the atria, both the atria start contracting together. As a result, जो contract जो ही ये contract करेंगे atria, जो AV valves हैं वो फिर से open हो जाएंगी. AV valves will be then when AV valves will now forcibly open. These valves will now open due to the contraction of the atria. जो ही ये open हो जाएंगी AV valves, जो remaining 30% of the blood जो है in the atria, that will be shifted to the respective ventricles. जो ये 30% remaining था वो अब atrial systole मतलब atrial contraction की वजह से 30% जो है वो अब आएगा into their respective ventricles. This is the case happening in the atrial systole, second phase of the cardiac cycle. Now let us see what happens in उसके बाद जो तीसरा स्टेज है उसमें क्या होता है. We know that तीसरा स्टेज जो है that is the ventricular systole. Now let us see what happens in the ventricular systole. This is the right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. This is the pulmonary artery. This is the aorta. This is the bicuspid valve. This is the tricuspid valve, together called the AV valves, and these are called the semilunar valves. उसके बाद अब 100% blood आ गया into the ventricles. अब जो atrial systole की वजह से remaining 30% जो यहाँ पे रह गया था वो भी आएगा into the ventricles. अब क्या होगा, जो atria ने contract ऐसे node ने action potential produce किया जिसकी वजह से atrial systole हो गया. अब वो पहुंच गया at the AV node. AV node जो है that will transmit this action potential into the ventricular myocardium. As a result, this ventricular myocardium will contract now, independent of the atrial systole. जो ही आप ventricles contract करेंगे at the beginning, जो ही ventricles contract करना start करेंगे, ये pressure जो in ventricles में होगा वो बढ़ जाएगा, धीरे धीरे बढ़ जाएगा. जो ये valves होंगे वो forcibly it will try these AV valves to open and try to move the blood into the atria. But as we know that these valves are supported by special fibers that are called the chorditendinae. These are called chorditendinae. Special fibers that are called chorditendinae, and chorditendinae are supported with the special types of muscles called the papillary muscles. As these chorditendinae push these valves back, and they prevent the backflow of blood into the right atrium. That's why when ventricles contract, blood does not go back into the atria. जो ही at the beginning of ventricular systole, जो ये valves यहाँ से ऊपर हो जाएंगे, वो these valves will push now the blood back into the ventricles, and a sound is produced called the S1 sound. That's called the love sound. That's why the S1 sound or the love sound is produced at the beginning of the ventricular systole. At the beginning of ventricular systole, जो ही ventricle contract करता है, ये इसको try करता है वहां से जाने के, लेकिन chorditendinae उसको वापस chorditendinae की help से वापस push करता है blood को, and a sound is produced that's called the S1 sound or love sound. Now जो ही ये वापस आ जाएंगे, अब यहाँ से ब्लड नहीं जाएगा, प्रेशर धीरे धीरे इंक्रीज होगा, जो ही वेंट्रिकल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करेंगे, these semilunar valves will be forcibly open. Now SL valves will open. जो ही SL valves open हो जाती है, the blood will be forced into these main arteries. From right ventricle, the blood will be pushed into the pulmonary artery, and from the left ventricle, this blood will be pushed into the aorta. This is the main reason of the main मकसद होता है of the ventricular systole, blood को pump करना into the pulmonary circulation and into the systemic circulation. Now ये मतलब जब ventricle contract करते हैं, इसी दौरान जो है atria जो है that relax. That is why atrial diastole and ventricular systole occur simultaneously. They overlap with each other. Now उसके बाद जो ही ये blood चला गया into the main arteries, at the end of एट द एंड ऑफ वेंट्रिकुलर सिस्टोल। अब वेंट्रिकल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करना बंद करेगा। जो ही वेंट्रिकल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करना बंद करेगा, जो यहाँ पे ब्लड होगा, लास्ट पे जो यहाँ पे ब्लड रहेगा, दैट विल टेंड टू मूव बैक इनटू द वेंट्रिकल। जो ही वेंट्रिकल ने कॉन्ट्रैक्ट किया था, अब ब्लड चला गया इनटू द आयोटा। अब जो लास्ट पे यहाँ पे ब्लड बचेगा, जो 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 लास्ट पे चला गया इनटू द आयोटा और इनटू द पल्मोनरी आर्टरी, जो ही वेंट्रिकल्स अब रिलैक्स करेंगे, दिस ब्लड विल टेंड टू गो बैक इनटू द वेंट्रिकल्स, but these valves will push the blood back into the aorta, and a second sound is produced. S2 sound is produced, or the doob sound is produced due to the closure of SL valves. At this time, S2 sound is produced. That's why we can say that two sounds are produced: S1 sound and S2 sound. S1 sound is produced at the beginning of the ventricular systole. At the beginning of ventricular systole. At the beginning of ventricular systole, but due to the closure of AV valves, उस वक्त AV valves close हो गई थी at the beginning of the ventricular systole. अब जो S2 sound है, S2 sound is produced at the end of the ventricular systole. जो ही ventricles अब बंद करेंगे contract करना, at the end of the ventricular systole जो है वहाँ पे contract, वहाँ पे जो semilunar valves है वो बंद हो जाएंगे at the end of ventricular systole जो है, due to the closure of SL valves. That's why first heart sound is associated with the closure of AV valves, and second heart sound is produced due to the closure of semilunar valves. And S1 sound is produced at the beginning of ventricular systole, and S2 sound is produced at the end of the ventricular systole. That's why this was all about the cardiac cycle. And the relaxation and the relaxing portion of this cardiac ventricles is called the ventricular diastole. Now we will try to know what is this ECG. ECG is simply the graphical representation of the electrical activity of heart. जो electrical activities heart में हो जाती है, उनको अब हम करेंगे graphically represent. For example, पहले होता है atrial systole, उसको हम graphically represent करेंगे. दूसरा स्टेप है ventricular systole और the atrial diastole, जो एक साथ हो जाती है. This will be represented graphically. And आखिर पे जो होता है, that is the ventricular diastole. These all the steps of the cardiac cycle will be graphically plotted, and this representation is called the ECG. Now here is a little bit confusion. What is electrocardiogram and what is electrocardiograph? जो ग्राम होता है, electrocardiogram जो होता है, that is the reading obtained or the graph को बोलते हैं, और reading obtained is called the electrocardiogram or electrocardiograph. The instrument or the machine used to identify this reading is called the electrocardiograph. This is the instrument. Here it is reverse. It is a bit confusing. Gram is the reading, or the graph. Here it is a little bit confusing. Gram is the reading taken, and the graph is the instrument or machine used. Now let us study this ECG. What the different waves of ECG represent us. हम एक कार्डियक साइकिल को रिप्रेजेंट करेंगे थ्रू ECG. This is the P wave, this is QRS complex, and this is called the T wave. The different waves of an standard ECG represents the different conditions of the heart. For example, P wave represents? P wave represents the first stage of the cardiac cycle, that is the atrial. जब atrial contract करेगा, that is the atrial depolarization, during which the remaining 30% of the blood present in the atria will go into the ventricles. That is called the atrial depolarization. It represents, this atrial depolarization represents the action potential generated by SA node. क्योंकि उसी वक्त SA node action potential generate करता है, जिसकी वजह से atria contract होकर remaining 30% blood जो है ventricles के through ventricles में enter कराता है. That is the atrial depolarization. उसके बाद जो है, that is the, उसके बाद क्या करना है, उसके बाद एक तो atria relax हो जाएगा और ventricle जो है that will contract simultaneously. दो stages होते हैं इसमें QRS complex में. QRS complex represents the ventricular depolarization, and at the same time it represents the atrial repolarization. उसके बाद जो टी वेव है दैट रिप्रेजेंट्स द, जब वेंट्रिकल्स कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करेंगे उनको अब रिलैक्स करना है, दैट्स व्हाई टी वेव रिप्रेजेंट्स द वेंट्रिकुलर रिपोलराइजेशन. Ventricular repolarization. These are all the stages of a cardiac cycle represented graphically, or this is the electrical activity of the heart represented graphically. This is the standard ECG. Now we can say that जितने एक cardiac cycle में और एक beat में, one cardiac cycle produces one beat, एक बीट में एक क्यूआरएस कॉम्प्लेक्स बनता है. सो अगर आपको किसी पेशेंट का स्टैंडर्ड ईसीजी दिया गया होगा, उसमें जितने नंबर ऑफ क्यूआरएस कॉम्प्लेक्स होंगे उतने नंबर ऑफ हार्ट बीट्स प्रेजेंट होंगे. फॉर एग्जांपल, इफ यू कैलकुलेट द नंबर ऑफ क्यूआरएस कॉम्प्लेक्स इन 1 मिनट. अगर एक सपोज इस लाइन में टाइम दिया होता है, अगर उसी 1 मिनट में आपने कैलकुलेट किए दीज क्यूआरएस कॉम्प्लेक्सेस, द नंबर ऑफ क्यूआरएस कॉम्प्लेक्स आर 60. This is that is the QRS complex is 60 and the heart of the patient beat is 60 times per minute. That is the heart rate of that patient. That's why the number of QRS complexes is the number of heartbeats or the number of cardiac cycles. Now जो अब हम देखेंगे, जो 1 मिनट में we know that the number of beat number or the number of beats per minute are controlled by the SA node. Since we know that SA node produces 72 action potentials per minute, that's why it produces 72 cardiac cycles per minute, and 72 cardiac cycles per minute means 72 beats per minute. Now we can calculate the time period of a cardiac cycle. We know that the time period of a cardiac cycle is equivalent to 1 minute divided by number of cardiac cycles in 1 minute, that is 72. That it will give the time of one cardiac cycle, that is 0.8 seconds. That's why we see that 0.8 seconds is the time period of a single cardiac cycle. Now during each cardiac cycle, left atrium pumps 70 milliliter of blood. जो ये वेंट्रिकल्स कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करते हैं, लेफ्ट वेंट्रिकल जो है उससे 70 मिलीलीटर ऑफ ब्लड पंप होता है एक बीट में, और जो राइट वेंट्रिकल जो है दैट आल्सो पंप्स 70 milliliter of blood. That's why we see that during the cardiac cycle, each ventricle pumps 70 milliliter of blood. This 70 milliliter of blood is called the stroke volume, or the volume pumped by each ventricle during each ventricular systole. This is called the stroke volume. That is, stroke volume in our human body is 70 milliliter. That is 70 milliliter of blood is pumped by ventricles in one beat. This is called the stroke volume. Now we can say that we can give the definition of a cardiac output. Cardiac output is the total amount of blood, total volume of blood given out by each ventricle in 1 minute. We know that एक मिनट में 72 टाइम्स हार्ट बीट होता है, और एक बीट में जो है 70 milliliter of blood is released out from the heart. We can now see that the cardiac output is equivalent to heartbeat multiplied by the stroke volume. That is, this formula is important. नीट में डायरेक्टली इससे भी क्वेश्चन आ सकता है. दैट इज स्ट्रोक और कार्डियक आउटपुट इज इक्वल टू हार्ट बीट. वी नो दैट हार्ट बीट इज 72 times per minute multiplied by stroke volume is 70 milliliter. That is approximately 5040 milliliter, or that is approximately equal to 5 liters. That's why we see that the cardiac output of a normal beating heart is 5 liters per minute. This is the end of this lecture. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe the channel and like the video.